Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 99. So I have a temporary co-host with me just for the first part of this episode. This is Ivy. If you're listening to the podcast later, she is our about 8-month-old puppy. She's some sort of a white poodly mix. My sister asked me if I adopted a lamb. That's probably the best way to describe her if you're not looking at her. I'll try to include a link to her picture when I do the show notes for the podcast. So we're going to talk about Ivy in tonight's episode because you might say, look at that cute face. How could this little fluffy ball of wonder cause trauma triggering and trauma-based fears? We're going to get into that. But I have a few announcements. I'm going to let her co-host while I make these announcements tonight. So I just want to talk just briefly about what's going to happen kind of over the next month or so of the show. And as usual, I hold space for change with this. I have some intentions that I want to mention, and any of this is subject to change. I thought tonight was going to be our last trauma-based fears episode. It's actually our 4th installment. And then I realized that the topic I already had in mind for next week's show is also a trauma-based fear. I wasn't thinking about it in that way till I started getting into it a little bit more. So I think there's going to be 5 parts to this series. And then I've been talking a lot about what we're going to do for the 2-year anniversary, which is coming up right around the middle of July or episode 104, like right in that area. And what I realized is I've got a bunch of things coming up in my personal life, and I was trying to think, like, what do I want to do for the 2-year anniversary? And what I want to do is take a couple weeks off. I haven't taken any time off since we started the show. I've pre-recorded some shows. I took 1 week off when my dog Emmett died, but we've been doing this for almost 100 episodes, and I've really never taken a break. So I think I'm going to take about 2 weeks off in the middle of July. As we get closer, I'll kind of remind you. I'm calling it my mini hiatus. And then for the actual 2-year anniversary special, my intention is to do a full sound bath, just like I have been offering here in Tucson in person. They usually last about 40 minutes or so. And so I just wanted to gift this to everyone who has been watching, whether you've been here the whole 2 years or not. And we'll talk more about that as we get closer to it. And again, I kind of hold space for change because you never know what life is going to bring you. So I want to say thank you to my co-host, Miss Ivy. She's going to go to puppy bedtime now. And we will jump into our topic. So I promised some puppy love tonight, so I gave you all a little bit of puppy love. And we're going to talk about her. We're going to talk about this trauma-based fear that I meant to talk about in like the first episode. I was going to kind of make a 2-part episode in that one episode. And each one of these episodes has sort of ended up being quite a bit longer than I was expecting them to be. There's a lot to say. And this episode tonight, we're going to talk about responsibility and commitment, and especially overcommitment, and kind of how all these things are related. And I realized as I was getting ready for the show tonight that I have no idea what I'm going to say because there is like so much to unpack here. We could go off on like numerous tangents, and so I'm just going to trust that as I'm in flow, I'm kind of sharing what's important, what people need to hear who are watching or listening to this. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of responsibility, commitment, and overcommitment. And let me tell you my story of how this came up, and then we'll kind of get into what causes this trauma-wise, like in our past, and then we're gonna do a really good meditation tonight. I have a fantastic grid. I have no bottom end to my grid. I almost always have grounding stones in my grid, and there's an onyx because I have the DFE. I have all 7 layers of DFE, but almost all of my grid, with the exception of the onyx and my Shiva lingams that I almost always use, are these like huge opening stones. I've got selenite and celestite and howlite. I've got lepidolite. There's just amethyst. There's a lot of like these really big expansive stones that I think are going to come into play when we get into the meditation. So let's talk a little bit about this responsibility and this overcommitment fear. And so we've had Ivy now for just over 3 weeks. There's a long story. I don't want to go into that because that'll take up a lot of time, but we lost our beloved almost 16-year-old Schnauzer in January. I knew that at some point we would invite another dog into the home, and it's been kind of a journey. So we got Ivy from a rescue and didn't realize she was quite as young as she was. They were thinking she was more like a year, and in puppy time, like 8 months to a year doesn't seem like a big leap, but there's a lot of development that happens. And so they agreed to let us foster to a doctor to keep her for 3 weeks and see how it went, just because our little poodle Wendell, who you've probably seen, I've posted pictures of him before, he's a little cranky. So we kind of wanted to see how they would get along. But what happened was almost immediately after we got her home, I just like went into full-on triggered fight, flight, or freeze. I will say that a lot of things had happened up until this point. I mentioned last week that I went on vacation with my family. I mentioned that I thought I was kind of triggered even before that. All of these trauma-based fears sort of started coming up at one time, which I believe is no accident. I believe that we're all being invited to start releasing and resolving some of this stuff because there's a huge opportunity for awakening that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight and probably more about in future episodes. We've talked about it a little bit in the past. And so we brought Ivy home, and I just was completely overwhelmed. I didn't think I wanted to keep her. I certainly was not expecting this puppy energy in my space. I work from home in my medical job, so like trying to work and keep an eye on this puppy, and like it was feeling like this huge overcommitment. It was feeling like it was way too much for me. I was getting completely overwhelmed. And so I started, we talk a lot about awareness, like the first step in any spiritual process is awareness, right? And sometimes that step into awareness is like kind of a long one, or it's a little bit of a subtle one. And so what happened to me with this was that I didn't realize that this was a trauma trigger. I just thought I was triggered because there was too much going on and I was overwhelmed. And I was telling my husband, I don't know if I want to keep her. I don't know if I can do this. This might be too much. And there's a lot of other stuff going on in our personal and professional lives for both of us right now, in our families. There's just a lot happening. So it was like, this seemed like something that was just kind of tipping that balance, that it was too much. And then I had this kind of thought, and this is exactly the kind of thought that led me to get into therapy all those years ago when I met my mentor, who I talk about all the time, when I was about 19. There was a bunch of stuff going on, and this little kind of tiny thought, it came up through all the noise. You can actually hear the bowls ringing a little bit while I'm talking tonight. So this little tiny thought came up kind of through all of this monkey mind, all this chatter, this mental worrying and overthinking that was going on in both of these situations. This little tiny, like soft, kind of intuitive voice was like, something's not quite right about this. Something's off about this. Something's off about your response to this. And in this situation, I stopped and I was like, wait a minute, I should be excited. I should be joyful about this. Like, we've got this cute little floppy puppy running around and of course, getting into puppy mischief, but she got our cranky old man to play with her. I mean, there was so much joy to be found and I was not feeling any of it. And so at first it took me a little while to get past that. We've talked about spiritual processing before. I don't want to go through all those steps. But it took me a little while to get through that first step of awareness into that mental processing, like, well, what's happening here? And then I was kind of like, well, maybe it really is too much. Maybe I really don't want this. Maybe it's too much after losing Emmett. Maybe it's too soon. Like a lot of these kind of what if thoughts came. A lot of these other fears started coming up. But what happened, I just did this weekend with my friend about another thing. You kind of have this worst case scenario, like face off, where you what if this, and what if this, and what if this, and what if this. And once you kind of vomit all that stuff out, you get a little chance to be quiet and figure out what's going on underneath the surface, because there's always something happening underneath the surface. We've got that tip of the iceberg, which in this case was me being like, I don't like this seems like too much. And then I realized that this was tied to this responsibility and overcommitment. And then I realized that is a trauma-based trigger or fear. And then all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute. What is going on here underneath the surface of this? Why am I not feeling any of the joy? Because of course life is a mixed bag, right? So there, like, my husband was excited and he was having fun with her. And then he was also annoyed because she was running off with his socks. Like, he was having what seemed like an appropriate balance of emotions. You know, he was having some frustration and a little bit of like, this is an adjustment. And then he was having a lot of like joy and excitement at watching her play and watching her learn and watching her interact with Wendell. And I was not having any of that, what we would call positive side. It was all negative. And anytime that's going on, that's always a good time to listen to that little voice that's like, something's not quite right here, and interrogate further. What is going on underneath the surface of this? So what was going on underneath the surface of this was this feeling like I was stepping into this huge responsibility, this huge commitment that I would not be able to get out of, and that I would be stuck in this commitment with all these other commitments in my life, and it started feeling like things were really out of control, like I didn't have any time for myself, like I wasn't going to have the opportunity to take care of myself in this, like I was kind of going to be taking care of all of these external things and losing that connection to taking care of myself. And that's a valid fear. All of these trauma-based fears are valid. What makes them trauma-based, what makes them triggering is the inflation. Because I'm sure my husband had some thoughts like this, like, oh, this is a big commitment, and, you know, but we've had dogs for 16 years. Like, this is not a new commitment to us. We got Emmett when he was 8 weeks old, and we had him for his entire life. And that is a huge commitment. But there's so much joy to be had in that commitment that I wasn't feeling. And so I started to think about this. I started to kind of dig down. I started to excavate. I started to get out all my spiritual tools and think about why. You know, why is this happening? What's going on? So let's talk a little bit about this responsibility, commitment, and then this fear of overcommitment. So from a trauma perspective, this trauma-based fear comes from having responsibility too early on in life, having too much responsibility and having it too soon. And I would argue that this, again, like last week, this is kind of a society-wide thing. And of course, there's a generational thing going on in here. You know, if you were in any kind of family where your parental figures were either absent and neglectful or abusive, or there's many reasons why you might have felt as a child like you had more responsibility than you could really handle at the time. And this is actually, interestingly, a little bit of a generational thing. So technically, depending on who you ask, I am Gen X, or I'm an elder millennial, or I'm in this little shoulder generation called Zennials, which is kind of this short 5 to 6 year time period that was between the older Gen X and then millennials. And I feel like I do have kind of attributes of both of these things. But there's a whole generation, the Gen X generation, that was raised with very little parental supervision. And part of that is because we were the first generation that most of us had both parents working outside of the home. So that you might have heard the term latchkey kids. I had so many friends who were latchkey kids. They had a little key that they literally wore around their neck like a necklace, and they came home and they opened their door. They started cooking for themselves at a really early age. And, you know, like we didn't have a microwave even till, I don't know, after my sisters were born. So like we cooked on the stove. You know, I started making mac and cheese when I was like probably 7. This is a generational thing. And it happened because there was this shift in society. My mom didn't work outside the home until later, but she had twin babies, and that is like a double full-time job. So, we were the generation where our parents just kind of sent us outside, and then there was literally a thing on the news at 10 o'clock, do you know where your children are? And people kind of make jokes about that. If you're on TikTok, there's a lot of these kind of generational jokes and people talking about different generations. And what that did was that created a generation of very independent people. But there was a price for that. And the price for that is this trauma, is this idea that we became independent probably earlier than we really should have, looking back on this. And again, there's no blame here. This was a societal shift. Everybody is doing the best they can. And actually, this kind of led to helicopter parenting, because the pendulum tends to swing, and there's probably a nice happy medium in the middle there that maybe eventually we're kind of coming back to. I was thinking about what a good example would be of this. And so I thought I would tell the story about how I started babysitting for other people's children when I was 9. And if you think about that, like my friend has a daughter who is like 13, and she's like, I would not let her be in charge of any children. And I was like, exactly, because she's still a kid. Like, she's at the point where she's going to transition into more responsibility. But the idea that I used to watch this kid who was 4 when I was 9, and the mom would not, sometimes she'd be gone till like 1 in the morning. Actually, my mom finally had to call and say, like, she can't do this anymore. Because I would call my mom like scared, because I was like, she said she'd be home 2 hours ago. And, I was only 9 years old. I should not have been left alone with a 4-year-old and, had the responsibility for keeping him alive and fed and clothed and all that stuff. Like, that's way too young. But that was just kind of the way things were back then. And I was a weird kid. I talked about that last week. I was kind of grown up for my age. But looking back on that, there is a trauma there. There is this trauma of sort of having responsibility kind of foisted on you before you were really emotionally equipped to handle it, before you had the emotional maturity to understand how to juggle responsibility and commitment. And so I think what that leads to in a lot of us is this fear of overcommitment. We talked last week about the fear about belonging and how that leads a lot of us to be people pleasers. So if you're a people pleaser and then you have this fear of overcommitment, there's this huge kind of push-pull there, because you don't want to say no to a commitment because you're a people pleaser, but you live in this chronic fear that you're going to be overwhelmed. And it's because at some point in your past you were overwhelmed. There was too much responsibility given to you in whatever situation. It could have been in the home, outside of the home, at school. It doesn't matter where it happened. Once that happens, it creates this trauma-based fear of overcommitment, of being overwhelmed, of getting in this situation where you just can't handle it, and not feeling like you had the resources to get out of it, to have the support that you needed. I mean, I just told that babysitting story. I was lucky because I was able to call my mom, but it was still traumatizing enough that I remember that. I remember like waiting for this woman to come home. She's like 2 hours later than she says she's going to be, and being like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do if she doesn't come home at all? Like, I'm not supposed to be out by myself at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm 9 years old, for the love of God. So that creates this kind of triggering process in us that when we do get presented with responsibility and we have a choice as an adult, sometimes we're going to completely shy away from that responsibility. Or we're going to take a couple steps into it and be like, ugh, I don't know, which is kind of what happened to me with Ivy. I was like, oh yes, I want to get a dog. And then, oh, but she's a puppy and I wasn't expecting this and this and this. And then it was like, you get this feeling like, you're on the Titanic and you can't get onto a lifeboat. That is kind of this triggering that comes up, that you don't have the resources you need to carry the responsibility that you're being asked to carry. So what do we do about this? We've talked on each show, kind of what the fear is, where it came from. How do we get out of this fear? How do we step away from this fear? And my answer for this particular fear is the same as my answer for a lot of fear, or just fear in general. And it's to rediscover joy. That is what happened to me in this situation. So I realized I was triggered. I realized that I should be feeling some joy, at least a little bit, instead of all fear and like, what happened and this is too much, and all fear and overwhelm, essentially which is what I was feeling. So I started working through the triggering. I started getting myself back into my body. I started doing all the things we do to let go of the triggering so that I could come back into ease. And then once I was back in ease, I was able to let go of all of those what if situations and start to really see the situation as it is, which is that there is so much joy. She is adorable. She does adorable things. She comes up and gnaws on your little fingers, which sometimes is painful, but it's also cute. She chases her toy. There's so much joy to be found, but we can't find the joy when we're in this triggered state. And then the other thing I would say, just like for anything else, as I mentioned, I'm not a licensed mental health professional, so when you're dealing with trauma, it's always good. This is a good trauma to talk about, to uncover. Like, I went through all of this stuff as I was thinking about this. I went back to that memory of babysitting at the age of 9 and sort of looking at it as an adult, like being like, man, that was not right. That shouldn't have been happening. Like, and so that trauma is held in my body. That trauma of like, what do I do with this little person I'm responsible for if his mother never comes home? And like, of course there were, I could have called the police. There was a lot of things I could have done, and he was fine. He was sleeping in his room. But as a child, like, I didn't have the emotional capacity to think beyond the fear, to think through this, like, process of what can I actually do. I was just completely overwhelmed. So, and thank you, Mom, for bailing me out of that situation, because I don't know what I would have done, and not letting me go back anymore. So what we're going to do for the meditation tonight, it's interesting because I almost did 2 different topics, and then I realized that these topics were completely related. So I don't know if you went outside and saw the full moon last night, but it was amazing. It was gigantic as it came up. It was in this strawberry color and everything. And I felt so illuminated. I talked about last month, it was just exactly the last full moon that I was down in Mexico. I got triggered and I went out and I sat with the moon. The moon has such beautiful energy and light and illumination, and it brings me such joy to see that full moon, and especially that huge full moon. I didn't have a lot of time last night because I had to get up really early this morning for work, but I just went outside and I stood in the light for just even like 3 or 4 minutes, and it was so nourishing. That's the word that I used last week. So what we're going to do in the meditation tonight is we're going to channel that beautiful illumination. We're going to invite that beautiful illumination in to create some joy. And joy and fear can't exist at the same time. I mean, I was talking about how in this situation, it's appropriate to have some fear because you are taking this huge responsibility of this dog who's probably, hopefully going to live 15 or 16 years. But then there's the joy and the discovery and the learning about each other. So you can hold fear and joy at the same time. So tonight, I think instead of trying to let go of fear or delving into fear, we may do that at another time. And we've done that in a couple previous meditations. We don't necessarily, I don't want to get into, where did this fear come from and all of that stuff. If you'd like to do that work, absolutely reach out to a coach, do some journaling on your own, reach out to a mental health professional. But what I'd like us to do tonight is just, even if the fear is there, let's invite joy in. Let's invite this beautiful illumination in to reignite our spark, to reignite our passion, to reignite our gratitude and our appreciation of what we do have, even in the midst of being sometimes triggered in these trauma-based fears. There is so much joy to be found. So we'll come back into our bodies. We'll do some breathing to get into ease. And I've got 2 crystal bowls here tonight, and we're just going to do some sound and some bathing. We're going to bathe in this beautiful moonlight. We might go to our waterfall of joy. This feels like an opportunity to invite a lot of joy. We've done this is our 4th episode on trauma, and we have delved into this trauma a little bit. We've kind of done some excavation. So tonight, let's reap the benefits of that. Once you excavate, you make room to bring that light in. And we're never going to let go of all of that fear. I still have fear about that responsibility, but the overwhelm has gone. The overwhelm is what came from the triggering. I still have, some of those what if questions, but I also recognize that asking those questions just creates worry. It's that vicious cycle. It's like running on a hamster wheel. I don't know what's going to happen. So why focus on all of the what ifs when I could instead breathe through my fear and focus on the joy and focus on the illumination and focus on that beautiful full moon that's out in the sky. I took Ivy out with me last night and we stood and we looked at the full moon together. I'm not sure she quite had the same appreciation I did, but you never know. We experienced it together and it brought me so much joy. So let's meditate together. So before we start tonight, before you even get into your comfortable position, let's do a little bit of shaking. We haven't done this for a while. I just listened to a couple of older episodes of Wind Down Wednesday where we did this, and I really liked it as a receiver of meditation. So if you're standing up, maybe you bounce a little bit on the balls of your feet, just shake your arms and wrists. If you're able to, again, if you're not physically able to shake, you can just kind of imagine that energy of shaking traveling through your body. Imagine it's just kind of traveling down from your head to your feet. Take a nice oxytocin breath as you do this. In through the nose, sigh it out, let yourself make some audible sound. And then as you come settled into whatever comfortable position you'd like to be in for this meditation, notice that just that small act of shaking for 20 or 30 seconds and taking a few deep breaths has already shifted your energy. It's already shifted maybe your mindset or your emotional state. Maybe you physically feel a little bit less tense. Take 2 or 3 more of those nice deep oxytocin breaths, letting the belly float out as you allow that breath to flow in. Sighing it out, that audible sound, high to low, vibrating the vagus nerve, inviting ease into the body, inviting yourself to step out of that overwhelm and into ease. Even if we can't release all our fears, we can let go of the triggered fears. We can let go of the overwhelm. We can let go of the worry and that rumination, that mental hamster wheel that we run on. What if this? What if this? What if this? Let that go. Let that wheel just grow motion and roll right out of your field of energy. Just send it away. Recognize that having fear is okay. Having fear is part of the human experience. But that triggered overwhelm, that triggered response is what we want to train ourselves to let go of by coming back into ease. So maybe take 2 or 3 more deep oxytocin breaths. Maybe move around a little bit more if something's uncomfortable. I'm shrugging my shoulders a few times just to kind of release some of the tension in my head and neck. Just coming really present into the body, really comfortable, really grounded. Allow yourself now to feel your connection with the ground, whatever part of you is touching the ground. Maybe it's your feet or your bottom. Maybe you're lying down on the ground. Or if you're lying on something like a bed, just imagine that that's the ground. Let your intention do the work for you. Send those beautiful roots down and out from your feet or your base of your spine, from the entire back of your body. Let those roots extend out. Let them grow. Let them grow behind you. Don't forget about your back. And then again, notice how you feel. Maybe you feel more settled, and a little bit heavier, more relaxed. Maybe not, and that's fine too. Just notice coming into that observer state now. If emotions come up, just allow them to flow. Take deep breaths as you need to. Sometimes when we step into joy, it can be really overwhelming, especially if it's been a while since we've been there. So give yourself permission to feel. Allow that crown chakra, the top of your head, to open. And with some really nice intention tonight, maybe even say this out loud. I invite divine light to flow into my head. I invite divine light and love to fill my mental space, to fill my face and my jaw, my neck and my throat. I invite this beautiful golden light of divine energy to flow into my shoulders and down my upper arms. I invite this light to flow into my elbows and my forearms, my wrists and my hands. I invite this beautiful, loving, unconditional love to flow into my chest and my heart space, into my upper back and my mid back. Take a nice deep breath here, letting that energy again flow into the heart space. Let that golden light fill up your heart space like there's a beautiful sun glowing at your heart. I allow this beautiful unconditional love to flow into my belly, my mid and low belly, my low back, my beautiful cave. I flood my cave with light and love. I allow this beautiful divine light and love to flow into my hips and my pelvis, into the base of my spine. Take a nice deep breath and feel this light flowing all the way down through your torso now into your hips and your pelvis. Sigh it out. I allow this beautiful divine light and love to flow into my thighs and down to my knees. Take another beautiful deep breath in, letting this energy flow all the way down through your head and your torso, through the legs and into those knees. And then sigh it out. I allow this unconditional light and love to flow down through my lower legs into my ankles and feet. And one more deep breath here. Draw that energy all the way down through your entire body into the feet, and then sigh it out. Start to imagine now that you're out in that beautiful full moon light. Perhaps you're standing next to your waterfall of joy. If you're not familiar with that, it's just a really beautiful waterfall that exists just for you in your safe space, in your energetic sanctuary. And the water that flows down this waterfall is love and bliss and joy, is that divine light that we just invited in to our bodies, to our personal energetic space. So picture yourself now standing near your waterfall of joy, and then look up and notice there's this giant full moon. And in your sanctuary, the full moon might look different. So spend a minute to look at it. Maybe it's a different color. Maybe the texture is different. Maybe you hear something associated with this beautiful glowing orb. But know that this illumination is joy. This illumination is awakening, is love in its true unconditional form. If you'd like, you can step into your waterfall and allow that joy and bliss to flow directly over your body, or just settle yourself on the banks next to the waterfall, bathing in the moonlight. Just let your intuition call to you here, but really see that moon, really feel that illumination, so much joy coming through. All of this light around you, all of this expansion around you. Let yourself get big here. Maybe you physically start stretching your body out. Maybe you're just visualizing that it's happening in this inner space that you're working in. But let yourself get big here. Let your energy get big here. Let this beautiful illumination of the moon fill your entire body and the space around your body and the room you're in. Let it fill that beautiful energetic sanctuary, illuminating that exquisite waterfall of joy, of love and bliss. Completely surrounded now by this light, by this illumination, by this awakened, unconditional love and joy. And as we step into sound, just keep bathing in this. You deserve to let go of everything else that's going on for the next few minutes and to bathe in this illumination, in this joy and this love, this bliss. Even if all you feel is the tiniest spark, even if you've been in a dark space, just look at the moon and know that it shines for you. Specifically for you. This moon is made for you. To show you how much you're loved. To show you that you have access to joy. Let your heart open here if you dare, if you can. Invite that illumination to come directly into your heart space. Invite it to come into your belly and your head and the rest of your body, but especially that beautiful heart space that is made of this illumination, that is made of this unconditional love. And just bathe in this light, bathe in this sound, bathe in this joy. in this light for the last few moments here. Perhaps you've thrown all your clothes off and you're dancing in the moonlight or swimming in that beautiful pool of bliss next to your waterfall. Maybe you're standing under the waterfall. Let yourself bathe now in whatever way is calling to you. Allow this joy to come into your being, to reignite your own innate joy. That unconditional love is joy, it is bliss. Even if there's fear there, you can find that unconditional love. You can find that divine connection. You can learn to bring the body back to ease, to bring the mental body into ease, to let go of that worry and that overwhelm, that triggered fear, by coming back to the heart, by coming back into the body, by allowing the earth to support you as she's meant to, by bathing in the illumination of the moon as we are meant to. Feel that light enter every cell of your being now. The physical body, the mental body, the emotional body, the energetics of all of those bodies, and that spiritual core of yourself, the soul, that divine connection, that divine light that you are made of. All is illuminated, all is love, all is joy. As you feel ready, very slowly begin to come out of this visualization. Perhaps you're in the water and you'll step off, step it out, come to the banks, come. Keep that illuminated moon with you. Let it come back into the room with you, into your space. If you'd like, you can gently allow the crown chakra to close or leave it open for the highest good. And allow that moon to rest in the top of your head here above the crown. Let it live just above the top of your head. Let it stay there through this next few days, through this full moon. Let it bathe you just as we did as you move forward into the rest of your day or evening. Even if the moon's not full outside right now, you can allow this beautiful full moon in your own energetic space to illuminate you with this love and joy. Let yourself come back into the body now if you feel like you stepped away from it, and affirm with me out loud. I am fully present in my body. I am fully present in my body, and I am illuminated with love. I am fully present in my body, and I deserve joy. Everyone deserves joy. Let yourself feel that in the last moment here. And then as you're ready, begin to move your body, wiggle your fingers and toes, maybe roll your wrists and ankles. Move your head around, shrug your shoulders a few times. Just be really slow with this. There's no rush. Be really gentle. Respect your body here. Respect the journey that we just took together. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Thank you for taking this journey into these trauma-based fears with me. It's a difficult journey, but it's so worth it, because as we let go of that triggering, we open to more joy. We make space in our being for this joy and bliss that we so richly deserve. Have a beautiful rest of your evening and an illuminated rest of your week, and I will see you next week for Wind Down Wednesday.